The rice fields are empty. A woman crouches by the side of a dirt road in Calcutta. Her hands shake as she lifts a handful of dirt to her mouth. She chews, swallows. Her eyes are hollow, sunken deep into her skull. Around her, bodies lie motionless in the midday heat. Flies swarm. The air smells like death. A British officer walks past. His boots are polished. His uniform is pressed. He doesn't look down. Behind him, a child sits against a wall, too weak to cry. Her ribs press against her skin like the bars of a cage. She stares at nothing. She's 4 years old. This is 1943, the height of World War II. And in Bengal, India, 3 million people are dying of starvation, not because there's no food, but because the empire decided they didn't deserve it. This is the Bengal Famine, one of the deadliest man-made disasters in human history. And it wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was policy. It was planned, it was enforced, and it was ignored, while millions starved to death in the streets. You've probably never heard the full story. Most people haven't, because this is the part of history they don't teach in textbooks. This is the part the British Empire tried to bury. But here's what they never told you. Let's rewind. It's 1943. World War II is raging. The Japanese have invaded Burma, modern-day Myanmar, and they're pushing toward India. The British are terrified. They can't afford to lose India. It's the crown jewel of the empire, the economic engine, the source of soldiers, resources, and power. So they make a decision. They prioritize the war effort above everything else, above reason, above morality, above human life. And Bengal, a region in eastern India, becomes the testing ground for just how far a colonial power is willing to go. Bengal is one of the richest agricultural regions in the world. It grows rice, jute, vegetables, fish. The land is fertile, the rivers are full. The people have been feeding themselves for centuries. But in 1943, something changes. The British government, under Winston Churchill, begins redirecting food. They stockpile rice for the military. They ship grain out of Bengal to supply British troops and Allied forces. They create artificial shortages to prevent the Japanese from seizing supplies if they invade. And then they watch as the Bengali people begin to starve. At first, it's subtle. Prices start to rise. Rice becomes expensive. Families who could afford 3 meals a day now struggle to afford 1. Village markets run low on stock. Farmers are forced to sell their crops to the government at fixed prices, prices so low they can't survive. And then the hoarding begins. Local merchants and landowners, sensing disaster, start stockpiling rice. They hide it, sell it at inflated prices. The poor are priced out. The vulnerable are left with nothing. And the British? They do nothing. In fact, they make it worse. The colonial government enforces something called the denial policy. It's a scorched earth strategy designed to prevent the Japanese from finding resources if they invade. So, they destroy boats, thousands of boats. These are the boats fishermen use to catch food, the boats villagers use to transport rice, the boats that connect rural Bengal to the rest of the world. Without boats, villages are cut off. Food can't move. People can't trade. Communities are isolated. Starvation spreads like wildfire. By mid-1943, the streets of Calcutta are lined with the dying. Families walk for miles, hoping to find food in the city. But there's none. Mothers carry dead children in their arms, too exhausted to bury them. Men collapse in alleyways, their bodies so thin you can see every bone. And still, the British export food. Ships leave Calcutta's ports loaded with rice. Grain silos sit full, reserved for the military. They argue they need it for the war. They argue it's a matter of national security. But here's the truth they don't say out loud. They just don't care. To them, Bengali lives are expendable. They're colonial subjects. They're not British. They're not white. They're not worth saving. Churchill himself says it. When officials beg him to send relief, he responds with contempt. He blames the Indians. He says they're breeding like rabbits. He asks, why hasn't Gandhi died? He jokes about the famine. He calls it a distraction. And here's the part that'll make your blood boil. By August 1943, the death toll is climbing into the hundreds of thousands. Entire villages are wiped out. Fields are abandoned because there's no one left to work them. Children wander the roads alone, orphaned, starving, waiting to die. Some families sell everything they own, their land, their tools, their jewelry, just to buy a handful of rice. Others sell their daughters into servitude, into prostitution, anything to survive. And the British? They do nothing. Local Indian officials and activists try to help. They set up soup kitchens. They distribute what little food they can find, but it's not enough. It's a drop in the ocean. The colonial government, meanwhile, continues to insist there's no famine. They refuse to declare an official emergency. Why? Because declaring a famine would require them to act. It would force them to divert resources, to prioritize Indian lives over British interests. And they're not willing to do that. So they lie. They control the narrative. They censor the press. They suppress photographs. British newspapers barely cover it. When they do, they frame it as a food shortage, not a famine, not a catastrophe, not mass murder. But in Bengal, the truth is undeniable. The roads are filled with corpses. Dogs and vultures feed on the dead. The smell of decay hangs over entire cities. People are so desperate, they eat grass, leaves, tree bark. They boil leather. They drink dirty water and die of dysentery. This is not a natural disaster. This is not an unavoidable tragedy. This is policy in action. Picture this. It's a morning in October 1943. You're walking through the streets of Calcutta. The sun is rising, but the city is already awake. Not because people are working, but because the dying don't sleep. You hear coughing, moaning, the shuffle of bare feet on stone. You smell rot, urine, smoke from funeral pyres that burn day and night because there are too many bodies. You pass a woman sitting on the curb. She's holding a baby. The baby isn't moving. She rocks it gently, humming a lullaby. She doesn't realize it's been dead for hours. A few feet away, a man lies face down in the dirt. No one checks on him. No one moves him. There are too many. It's become normal. You walk past a food depot. It's guarded by British soldiers. Inside there are sacks of rice, thousands of them, stacked to the ceiling, reserved for the war effort. Outside, a crowd of skeletal figures begs for scraps. They're turned away. One of them, a boy, maybe 12 years old, tries to climb the fence. A soldier shouts. The boy falls. He doesn't get back up. This is Bengal in 1943. This is what colonial rule looks like. By the end of 1943, the death toll has reached 2 million. By early 1944, it's 3 million. Maybe more. No one knows the exact number because no one's counting. The British finally allow some relief efforts to begin. Not because they care, but because the international pressure is becoming impossible to ignore. American journalists are starting to report on it. Indian nationalist leaders are using it as ammunition against British rule.
So Churchill's government reluctantly allows food shipments to resume. They release some stockpiled grain. They ease restrictions. But it's too late. The damage is done. Millions are already dead. Millions more are traumatized, broken, displaced. Entire generations are lost. Families are destroyed. Communities are shattered. And the British? They move on. No apology, no accountability, no acknowledgement that they caused it. In fact, they do the opposite. After the war, British officials write reports that blame the famine on Indian incompetence. They say it was caused by hoarding, by overpopulation, by the failures of local governments. They erase their own role. Churchill himself never expresses regret. He never admits fault. In his memoirs, he barely mentions the famine at all. It's a footnote, an inconvenience. To him, it was just another problem in a long war. To the people of Bengal, it was the end of the world. Here's what they never told you. The Bengal famine wasn't caused by a lack of food. Study after study has proven this. Economist Amartya Sen, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on famine, showed that Bengal produced enough food in 1943 to feed its population. The famine was caused by policy, by deliberate choices, by colonial priorities that valued British lives over Indian lives. It was caused by the denial policy, destroying boats and transportation, cutting off rural communities, forced requisitioning, taking rice from farmers at artificially low prices, export policies, shipping food out of Bengal while people starved, military stockpiling, hoarding grain for troops while civilians died, refusal to declare a famine, avoiding accountability and action, censorship, suppressing information and controlling the narrative. And here's the most damning part. Australia offered to send food aid. Canada offered to send grain. The United States offered to help. Churchill refused. He said the ships were needed for the war. He said it wasn't a priority. He said Indians were to blame for their own suffering. One of his advisors, Leopold Amery, begged him to act. Amery wrote in his diary that Churchill's attitude toward Indians was Hitler-like. Think about that. A member of Churchill's own cabinet compared his racial policies to Hitler. But this part was erased from every textbook. Churchill is celebrated as a hero, a war leader, a defender of freedom. Statues of him stand in London, Washington, and around the world. But in Bengal, he's remembered as a mass murderer. Let's talk about the people, because that's what gets lost in the numbers. 3 million dead. It's such a massive figure, it becomes abstract. It stops feeling real. But every single one of those 3 million was a person. A mother who watched her children waste away and couldn't do anything to save them. A farmer who worked his entire life only to see his crops taken and his family destroyed. A child who didn't understand why there was no food, who didn't understand why the adults couldn't help. There are photographs from the famine. They're horrific. Bodies in the streets, skeletal children, mothers too weak to stand. But even those don't capture the full horror. Because photographs can't show the sound of a child crying from hunger. They can't show the smell of death in every alleyway. They can't show the psychological trauma that lasted generations. Survivors of the famine carried the scars for the rest of their lives. They remembered the hunger, the fear, the helplessness. They passed those memories to their children, to their grandchildren. The Bengal famine didn't just kill 3 million people. It broke an entire society. Here's what's even more disturbing. This wasn't the first time the British Empire caused a famine, and it wasn't the last. Between 1765 and 1947, India experienced dozens of famines under British rule. Tens of millions died. Some historians estimate the total death toll at 50 million or more. Before colonization, India had famines, but they were manageable. Local rulers stockpiled grain. Communities supported each other. Trade networks redistributed food. But the British dismantled those systems. They replaced them with policies designed to extract wealth, to serve British interests, to feed British markets. They turned India into a plantation, a resource to be exploited. And when that exploitation caused famine, they blamed the victims. They said Indians were lazy, backward, overpopulated. They used racist pseudoscience to justify their neglect. They treated mass death as an acceptable cost of empire. The Bengal famine of 1943 wasn't an outlier. It was the system working as designed. So why does this matter today? Because the Bengal famine isn't ancient history. It happened 82 years ago. There are still survivors alive, still families who remember. And the structures that caused it, colonialism, racism, economic exploitation, they didn't just disappear. They evolved. They adapted. They continue in different forms. Today, we still live in a world where some lives are valued more than others, where powerful nations extract resources from weaker ones, where famines and crises are blamed on the victims instead of the systems that cause them. The Bengal famine teaches us that mass death is often a choice, that natural disasters are rarely natural, and that the people in power will always protect their interests, even if it means watching millions die. It also teaches us the danger of historical amnesia. In Britain, most people don't know about the Bengal famine. It's not taught in schools. Churchill's role is glossed over or ignored. The empire is remembered fondly as a force for civilization and progress. But in India, the memory is alive. The anger is real. The demand for acknowledgement, for accountability, for truth, it's still there. History isn't neutral. It's written by the winners. And the winners don't like to admit when they were the villains. So here's what you need to understand. The Bengal famine wasn't a tragedy. It was a crime. It was the deliberate starvation of 3 million people. It was colonial violence disguised as policy. It was racism so deep, so pervasive, that the deaths of millions were considered acceptable. And the worst part? It worked. The British kept control of India. They won the war. Churchill became a legend. The empire maintained its image of benevolence and civilization. But the bodies piled up in Calcutta tell a different story. They tell the story of an empire built on exploitation, of power maintained through violence, of a system that valued profit over people, control over compassion, empire over humanity. And they tell us something we need to remember. History doesn't just happen. It's made by people, by choices, by systems that prioritize some lives over others. The Bengal famine happened because the British chose to let it happen. They chose policy over people. They chose empire over humanity. They chose to look away while millions died. And when it was over, they chose to forget. But we won't, because the 3 million people who died in Bengal deserve to be remembered. They deserve to have their story told. They deserve for the world to know what was done to them. And they deserve for us to learn the lesson that empires don't fall because they run out of power. They fall because they run out of humanity. And the British Empire lost its humanity long before it lost its colonies. This is the Bengal Famine. This is the story they tried to bury. Now you know the truth.